Our God in heaven, we do thank you so much for these opportunities to learn about the world that we live in, the world that you've created, and all the people that we live in this world together with. We just pray that the subjects that we are learning about, that you bring to light the importance of understanding, and we just pray that the understanding will help change our minds and our characters to be more like you. I pray, Lord, that you would please help me to formulate all the things that I've read into a clear presentation, that I may do this subject some justice, but also help me just to bring clarity to my mind. And I just pray for everybody listening that we would all come with hearts and minds open to receive these things. We pray for a blessing on everybody here today, and who's not able to join us, we ask also for a blessing. In your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, so my subject today, I've chose the subject talking about trans people in sports. And the reason why I chose this subject is when Pamina was here, we were all speaking actually in this room, weren't we? And we were talking about the different topics in society, and as an institution, where do we actually stand on these topics? And some, ideas were given around, but the one that kept coming into my mind was trans people in sports. And I assumed I kind of might have understood a little bit about it. So I thought this would be an easy subject to present. Well, I was definitely wrong in that way. So I know we don't have apologies here, but I apologise to myself for thinking that I actually might have understood something. But I guess that gives us, I guess that's how we roll in here, is we're understanding that there is so many things aren't as easy as they seem. So the complexities of trying to understand trans people in sport, it's not just about layers of complications, but there is nuances in those complications, that the arguments for and against are very valid. And I think these subjects really need to be handled with care as well. So I was reading a lot of information, and it was extremely overwhelming. I'm not going to lie. I didn't know how to present any of the information because it is so vast, so complicated. It's so interwoven, yet sometimes it seems so disjointed. So I was reading a book, and Elder Terry actually suggested that I take some really, not so much, I didn't sort of, the format's not sort of a summary, but I've taken a lot of the points from this book. So I think that's just a good format to start on, because the book actually, I'm going to talk about today, it actually brings in a lot of these complications in a really, I'm not going to say easy way to understand, but really tries to find balance with all the arguments. So I'm just going to write the name of the book on the whiteboard. It actually goes by, it's called Fair Play. Oops, I just turned the video off. The book itself is called Fair Play. And it actually won an award. So this book was in 2023. Thank you. So the book is called How Sports Shape the Gender Debate. And then the other title of the book, it's called Trans Athletes and the Fight for Fairness. So just in the title itself, gives a very good overview of not just only what the book is about, but all the arguments that actually, I guess, have made Katie Barnes is the author, made Katie choose the title. So I'm going to write it on the board because it actually helps us to kind of see the overview of the argument. So, how sports shape the gender debates. And the other title was Trans Athletes and the Fight for Fairness. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but I would love this to be an interactive discussion, because I think it'd be really good to hear out loud what people are thinking. Questions, comments are all very welcome. So as Terry said, Terry said that I'm only presenting today, so we've got that time to unpick this. I kind of want to say this now. I was going to say this later, but after even reading what I have, and it's only a tip of the iceberg, I still are curious about both sides, because both sides have very valid arguments to these topics. So the author is Katie Barnes. Now, Katie Barnes really needs a whole presentation on themselves. I'm not going to bring it all out now if we've got time a bit later, but quite qualified to be speaking on this subject. But just to give you a quick, so Katie is a journalist, mainly in the sporting arena, was an athlete themselves, and really could help us understand more about gender. Brendan and I, when we're driving today, we're reading a little bit of Katie's profile and pronouns, and kind of gave us a bit more of an insight to what that actually means. So I'm not sure if we have time today, but definitely would love to speak more about Katie next on another presentation. Alrighty, so before we jump into the book, I was thinking about, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about some of the definitions and terms that I will be saying today. And I know some of you, this is probably just review, but if not, I'm just going to keep it very, very simple. So in the terms of when we talk about, I might move that chair, is that okay? Yeah. When we talk about sex versus gender, actually, I might just bring that over here. So sex versus gender. And then we want to have a look at cisgender. I'm running out of room already, aren't I? And transgender. Can you see that okay? Yep. Okay. Alrighty. So if we think about sex, so sex is usually what we're assigned at birth. So it's about based on the body parts, chromosomes and hormones. That's how most people would put that in a category. So, and we know this is not right, but typically it would be a female or male, even though we know that that's not so straightforward. But I'm just trying to do a bit of a high level here. So when we think of sex, we just think of body. Now, when we think about gender, it's actually what someone feels on the inside. So it's what they identify as. So either man, woman, both or neither. And it also can be the way they express themselves. So it could be the way they have their hair, the way they wear their clothes. So we're going to think of gender as just identify, so how they identify themselves. All right, so if you think in just one sentence, so sex is about the body, is about your body, and gender is about who you are. All right, so if we think of cisgender versus transgender, so your gender identity, so with cisgender, so your identity matches the sex that you were assigned at birth. So for example, if you're assigned as a female at birth, then and you identify as a woman, then you're you are a cisgender. Sorry. Alrighty. So if you were transgender, it would mean that your gender you would identify different from the sex that you were assigned at birth. So somebody was born a male at birth, but who identifies as a woman, they would be under that transgender. And my spelling's really bad today. All right, so in just one sentence, so we can just say it means same, and transgender you could say different. So it's different what you're assigned at birth. It's a very easy way. There's a little, I was thinking about how to make it really even simpler. If we just took, this is a box, and if we were thinking as we were born and what we were assigned at birth, a label, that would be, if you put the label on it, that would be your sex. But the gender is what you would feel like or identify is what is on the inside. So if that makes sense. So for most people, that label matches what's inside, but for other people, it's not. So that's just a really quick way of, is there any questions on that little bit so far? I'm going to rub it out because I just need the whole board, so apologise for that. That's a very simple overview, just so that when I'm speaking about the different shaky one. Alrighty, we'll move on. So with the book, one of the first chapters is talking about why the debate over trans athletes matter. And I think what we're finding is that the reason why sports has become such a huge battleground is because of the gender argument. So it's sort of the arena of sports has really brought in a lot of I guess in every aspect, from political arenas to the media and to illegal attention. It's actually really become, as Katie identifies, it's one of the biggest major battlegrounds of the debate on that's through the title to how sports shape the gender debate. So there are a lot of complex questions that Katie really tries to bring about. Which one? Sorry, I've just got two. I think that's one. And the questions that we're going to look at today, it's all about bringing these things into some kind of balance. So Katie talks about biology, about fairness, about gender identity, and one about the purpose of sport. And to do that, as I was saying, that Katie really tries to find this balance and to present in a balanced way. So we're going to have a look at some of these through history, uh, the science. I don't think I've given myself enough room. And then policies. What will happen when I'm presenting is we'll come in and out of these um, topics. I just had to kind of break it down some way to try and get my head around how to present it. So even though I might come in and out of these and show some arguments on both sides, they're actually interacting simultaneously when things change. Some parts in history might change that creates these policies, and then science might come in and show some scientific proof that changes a policy and vice versa. So they're all very connected, even though they might seem like the titles are, um, are out on their own. One thing that Katie does bring out is the controversy is not just about the sport. It's in culture about, it's really the conflicting about gender and then the identity, just as like we're talking about the title. It keeps coming back to the titles that Katie has chosen to really bring out the issues. All right, so okay. So what happens when there are discussions in public forums online is that a lot of the discussions are taken without really bringing in arguments from history, not understanding the history, not understanding science, and also too, one really important factor is understanding real life experiences of these athletes. So in the book, Katie goes into um, a lot of real life stories, and I think it really gives a good avenue of what those experiences, what happened to these people while they're competing in sports, how a lot of I think it's nice. It's not. It's good to walk in their shoes to see what it was like for them. So that's the first. We're going to touch on history at first. So and there's something. I guess it came out of the Equal Equality Act. So we're talking about civil rights now. So this one, it was 1972. And once we talk about this, you'll see how this title, it's called Title IX, and how this actually really shaped a lot of what the debates are around now. So I'm going to walk you through that Title IX to begin with, a bit of history. I know we love history. All right. Trying to get my notes sorted out. All right. So what is Title IX? All right. So Title IX is a US civil rights law passed in 1972 as part of an education amendment of 1972. Sorry. So this is what the law states. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in denied benefits of or subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal funding. So what was happening is for women, education, the opportunities for education was really lacking. So they brought in this Title IX, which meant schools, colleges, universities who received federal funding, they must provide equal opportunities for males and for females. So the reason why it came about is because women and girls were facing huge, widespread discrimination in education. And I've just got a few examples of what it was like. So we're just putting the trans debate to the side for a minute. We're talking about Title IX, and then you'll see how it all interacts. So for equal opportunity, so women were often denied administration. in certain university programs, especially in medicine and law. Scholarships and financial aid were much more limited for women. School programs, sports programs for girls was extremely underfunded or non-existent. Schools often assume women would focus more on family roles than on their careers. So during the 1960s and 70s, we've got the women's rights movement. So we've got activists and lawmakers for laws to eliminate sex discrimination in education. So that's a whole different avenue about the people that created that, which is important. So what this was showing was equal access to education opportunities regardless of sex. So that's Title IX. Just to give you a little bit more context on that. So from admissions, so from a female admissions, women were no longer refused. This is what Title IX helped women in education. So they were no longer refused admissions. They had access to scholarships and financial aid. Academic programs, so women had equal access to fields like science, engineering, and law. And so there was a protection in place as well. So they had to ensure, so schools had to ensure women were not treated unfairly in that education. Now, this is how can I say this? So having this Title IX was all about, originally was set up for the education, for women's equal opportunities for education. But also what came out of that, and it's why Title IX, we're going to talk about Title IX, is because this is where it became, especially in the sports arena, this is where women's sports, participation in women's sports exploded. So you've got, and I guess too, this is where the Title IX, it's really the most impact. We can see that, we'll see that Title IX really shows the impact of where women came into sport in the first place. So, so before Title IX, hardly any women were participating in sport, and it had very little funding. So after Title IX came in, millions of girls were able to participate in sports. Women colleges, athletics expanded, and scholarships, and then we have professional opportunities increased for women in the sporting arena as well. So not only education, but in sporting as well. And then the law that the Title IX came under, that the actual schools had to actually actively invest in women's sports, and that was the law for that part. And to make sure there was compliance in that. So with the sports, there was 3 things that they had to comply with, or they would lose their funding. So proportionality, so they might, however many females were in the school, that's how much opportunities they had to have for women, which was great. And they had to also show expansion of opportunities, to show that there were sports that were like soccer and rowing and softball that were showing making a progress at least to equality. So there was a lot of accountability. And the last one was full accommodation of interest. So if there was a sporting team that wasn't they had to provide for it. So if there was a demand for a team to be for a women's team into, say, softball, that they had to then do what they could to make sure that that team was met. All right, so that was a compliant. So I'm just thinking what to skip to. So if we just consider this, that Title IX is largely considered one of the most important laws for women's sport in history. Is there any questions on Title IX? I'm going to talk about how it now interacts with transgender debate, but does anyone want to make a comment or question on that? So how does this Title IX connect with the transgender athletes debate? Let me just catch my breath. I'll just make sure I don't miss anything. All right, so this is probably one of the first arguments we might touch on. I think it's probably a good spot to start. So originally the Title IX was for education, and the sports came into being because of opportunities for women. So what's happening in the transgender realm is that the two sides, I'll explain the two sides. I'm not sure how to get this. I want to think about it in this way. So we've got, if I go to the policy side, so you've got Title IX, which brings about participation for women's sport. So what also happens is, unfortunately, or fortunately, it helps women's participation, which is really important. But then the flip side of this we have to think about is that now there becomes sex segregation. So now it's like, well, males are here, females are there. So, and then the argument comes in that it's a really rigid definition of what counts to be a female. So this is where the flip side of the argument, it's great having the participation, but now the policy is saying, well, we're going to segregate females into their own sport and males. So there's no interaction between there. So Title IX then defines female sport and then male sport, and there's no variation. So now they're saying, well, we're going to define what a female is, and there's no variation. So you're either in one category or the other category. So, and this is where the arguments, or the debates, I should say, come along, because in 1972 you have this, this is great that having females in sport, but if we look at today, the debate that's happening today, sorry, I just want to jump back over here. Sorry. So I better put it. So the sex segregation, sorry, it's all about fairness. This is their argument: fairness and opportunities for women. Which, when we hear that argument, we're like, well, that's great, because women need to have, the safety to be able to play sports, the opportunities to have to play sports and participation. But as I said, the flip side of that is now they are starting to define what a female is. And I think this is where Katie sort of segues into real life experiences for people. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Is what happens in history again is that there were some women that were being questioned on what category they actually fit into. So there were athletes were, especially coming up through college, universities into elite sports, there were some of the athletes that were questioned on what category are you? Are you a female or you're a male, sort of thing. So what happened was that in history they used to they used to test the athletes in certain ways, and this is where science was probably not its best moments. But in biology, they would look at they had three ways that they would examine somebody. So an athlete would come in and they would, well, we need to verify your sex you're competing in. And so some of them were actually not very dignified. They would do a physical examination where female doctors would be in a room. And this is all, I should have said this a long time ago. This is the argument's always based around a lot of the time about trans women in sport. So somebody that's has, we talked about before, was assigned as a male at birth, but has transitioned in into a trans woman. So while it wasn't a big debate back in the 70s and 80s, there were a few athletes that were questioned about their what category they should be running in because of the examinations that they failed in. So there were three, they would physically examine them, they would do a chromosome testing, and they would do hormone testing. So, which sounds like a fair way to kind of distinguish where you are, except that's not where everyone fits. And this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the athletes that Katie brings up, and it's a really, really interesting story. And I'm just going to put up on biology how when they were doing the chromosome testing, so you have, so females would be just considered, so their chromosomes are two X's, and a male would be an X and a Y chromosome. So Maria was a Spanish hurdlist, and in the 1980s, her sex was came under scrutiny, and I'm going to explain how that happened. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, and then I'll explain what Maria, what science learnt about Maria. So Maria, sorry, I'm just trying to find when I wrote about Maria's story. Maybe 2 seconds. Okay. So it was quite it was happened in the 1980s. It was quite a controversy that happened. So, um, so Maria Jean Martez Pafito, I'm going to write her name down in the chat because I can't pronounce it, is one of the most famous athletes that was connected to an intersex syndrome, which is called AIS, but the complete name, if you want me to, I'll write it on. It's called androgen insensitive syndrome. And you'll see why this is a really important discovery, I'm going to say, because Maria was, when she was born, she was identified with her body parts. She was female. But when she became into competitive sport, they did the chromosome test on Maria, and Maria, her chromosome test came back as, what's an X and a Y? Male. So Maria was competing in the female, I will write her name up, it's very long, in the female category. And because Maria's chromosome testing came back as X and Y, they disqualified her and said that she was no longer able to compete. And what happened was she fought, she fought it because she was born as a female, identified as a female, and even though she was banned, she was able to fight the band. And I just let her know. So on her body, so her body was chromosomes may have said XY, but her body, this is what her body presented as. So she had typical vagina as a female. She had no external male genitalia, so no penis or scrotum. Um, and she was assigned, so that's what she was presented at birth. So she's assigned at birth as a girl. She's raised as a girl. She identifies as a woman. And then through this testing, she realized that she had AIS. So Maria also can test for testosterone, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. And that's another category that defines where you should be competing as well. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. All right. So AIS typically your anatomy is typical female, but they also affects how the body responds to testosterone. And the reason why is because you have internal testes. So inside her body, she had internal testes, which she didn't know about, but no uterus or ovaries. So XY chromosomes. So you can see the complications of what Maria was faced with. So even though Maria had testes, wasn't able to produce testosterone typically as a male going through puberty is able to have that testosterone. That testosterone is a hormone, what it does physically to your body. So another reason why Maria wasn't allowed to participate is because the testosterone levels were high, even though Maria wasn't able to access those testosterone. All right.
Sorry, Rach, you may have already said, but is this woman, does she identify as female?
As female, correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
So as far as she knew, she was born female, grew up as a female, was competing in female sport. But it wasn't until they wanted to verify that when she had this chromosome testing that it became apparent that Maria had an X and a Y chromosome. So then she was disqualified. So she was banned from competing in women's sport.
Why did they have to verify it? What gave it away that she might have something?
Sure. And that's a good question. I'm not completely 100% sure. It'd be really good. I should find out why that was the case. But I think it was if they were questioned about anything that they would say, well, we're not too sure. I'm not too sure exactly why. Maybe the performance was so good. They could have questioned like what's going on here. So that's a really good question. Let me find out for you. I'll get back to you on that one. Good question.
Were they required to do all three tests for everyone?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, so
Yeah.
it wasn't just picking her out saying, oh, they had to do mandatory three tests to verify everyone.
Oh, not everyone. I think it was more of if it became a bit of questionable,
Okay.
like, there could be sort of, and many of the females were wrongly questioned or excluded. And this is where science and policy had to sort of start being better, because with science, all the I'll write that up now. So they realised through Maria, they realised the science had to step up because of what it was doing to these people in their sport. So when they were talking about biology, to determine someone's sex, it's so complicated. It's not just testosterone or chromosomes. There's so many variations. Actually, there's too many. I won't be able to fit them in. There's a big list I'll find. So if we just think there's chromosomes, there's hormones, we've got ovaries, testes, gonads, internal reproductive structure, external genitalia. So they're just some basic ones, but it was because of Maria's case that it made them change to relook at the policies that they had, because intersex people that were coming through. There's quite a few in her book actually, and she talks about them being banned and then being reinstated later on because science kind of caught up with what was going on. But their lives have been then torn apart by the media. This is where, really their private lives just became exposed, and that dignity of somebody, really, it really affected a lot of some people just walked away from the sport and never came back. So I'm just going to catch my breath for a minute just to figure out where to go from here. But if there's any
Rach,
questions so far,
can
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry, I
please.
was going to say, can I ask a question?
No.
That was a question, so I really want to, I guess.
That's it, you're done.
Spent my one. Um, just as you were saying, like it wasn't everyone that was tested. It was sort of if someone raised a question, just got me thinking, is this just what Salem witch trials look like today? Sort of you see somebody who, maybe often those sort of witch hunt accusations were literally just somebody saw someone, and made an accusation out of jealousy or whatnot, and they had all these elaborate methods to prove whether someone was or wasn't a witch. Is this our sort of modern day equivalent of that?
Yeah, it is interesting because it's sort of, even though it sounds really bad, or the Inquisition, or the really putting these people in the limelight, it made science step up. It made policies step up. It made um, people start questioning, we're so putting people in pigeonholes, that's a female and that's a male. But when it becomes for variations, science had to go, oh, okay, what does that mean? So,
I,
yeah,
I guess
It could be.
sorry, you go, Ray.
go.
Oh, no, it's just as you were talking then, I was thinking it could be a reminder too for us that it's easy for us to look back at things like that in history and think how ludicrous it was. But then when we're in something similar, and as you've been saying, we can see that there's valid arguments, people's fears and concerns are real. We should reflect on that, back then, people's arguments and fears were valid and real, and they were doing what they could with what they knew, and we're all just, I guess, doing what we can with the best information we have available at the time.
And I guess it goes back to the title of the book. So the reason they're interrogating this is to try and make it fair. So I guess that's the underlying goal here. Might seem ugly, it might look bad, but at the end of the day, I guess this is with the tension between the both sides. They're both striving for fairness.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I might just jump onto that because I think what happens is the arguments that, like, let's have a look back at this argument. So in 1972, this argument, Title IX was showing that, women need to be educated and to be in sports, but then that also created this sex segregation because they wanted fairness and opportunities for women. So today, the argument, if you're for trans people being in sports, your argument is, well, I want these trans people to have protections too, because another argument on this one is people are trying to bring in that because this is about sex, it should be gender identity as well. So this is what's happening in activism at the moment. Like they're wanting, we want to protect, you was just saying before, Brendan, so everyone wants fairness, but they also want protection. So if we'll just say you're against trans people, okay? So you want to protect this Title IX for women because you want fairness and opportunities for women, all right? Yeah. Because they haven't had it for many years and now we've got it, we want to hang on to it. So if you're against having trans people, intersex people into sports, then because you want protection and opportunities for cisgender females. You don't want that to be taken away because it was such a fight to get it in the first place, right? For females. So I'll go A for against. If you're pro-trans in sport, you want them to be protected. You want their gender identity to be protected. You want their integrity and their dignity to be intact.
Well,
And
it's a civil right, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you think about it.
Yeah, and you want them to be included.
This is complicated.
It is so complicated.
Rachel,
So
can
that's
I
how,
ask a question?
yeah, go for it. Yep.
I just wanted to know what causes the the governments to look into this to her life. I mean, was her performance different from normal female? Like because she's got this male hormones or chromosomes. Was her
Yeah.
performance because this is the first time, is it? 1972, Title IX come out.
So that was when the title came. Maria, this was the 1980s. This is where Maria, but you know what, Molly, what you've just picked on actually, I'm glad people are talking because it's giving me an idea of what people want to know because I got that much information here and I'm not too sure where to go with it. So you've just touched on a really important place. We're going to talk about performance because this is probably one of the arguments that everyone's familiar with. It's about testosterone, right? So we're going to talk about performance. So
because nowadays, in sport, they look at performance of somebody. See, I used to be a boxing trainer.
yeah.
Yeah. And when they see a performance, they start testing drugs. When this guy must take all of, they start come up with this idea. So they go into, start testing whether what, drugs they use, what, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. So Molly, I'm really glad that you brought up that point because we're going to talk about performance. So for those that know, for those that like me didn't know, so we're going to talk about the effects of puberty, especially male puberty. I'm not going to go completely into it. You can just Google what happens through male puberty. You'll get a massive amount of physiological changes in a male. So, and there's a few factors, but we'll just talk about testosterone. So when a male goes through puberty and that hormone testosterone comes in, huge things change physiologically for a man. So we're talking muscle mass. Be tired there, sorry. You've got strength, you've got endurance, you've got bone density, your bones are longer, feet, hands. If you just Google, like I said, you'll see how much a male physiologically changes. So before puberty, if we talk about fairness, as Brendan's brought up, before puberty, sports can be children can play sports in a fair sort of environment. So there's no physiological changes in that way. When puberty comes in, there's big changes physiologically between a man and a woman. So when we're talking about people, a trans woman who has gone through these pubic changes, who have got bigger muscle mass, they're actually able to produce, I think it's hemoglobin. I should ask you, Greg, is it hemoglobin? Can get more oxygen around the body? So you've got that anaerobic capacity more than a female that hasn't gone through puberty. So all these factors come into play. So when you have somebody that's come through puberty and then wants to then go into sports, there are different kinds of sports. You've got college sports, and then you've got, up to athletic sports. So pre-puberty, the fairness is pretty even. You can do quite easy between female male, but after puberty is where the changes happen. So when performance comes in, this is the biggest debate that they have. So they're talking about, so when you come into elite sports, you can't just go and just say, well, I just want to go and compete in women's sport, even though I was born as a male. There is huge, this comes under policies, there's huge amounts of transitioning that a male, sorry, a, a transgender woman needs to go through before they can actually compete in elite sports. So there's hormone suppression, so testosterone suppression. So a lot of the athletes get tested for testosterone because testosterone is an enhancing drug. Is that what you were saying, Molly? That if you're a sports competitor, that's why doping became huge, and doping was testosterone, right? So that's why this debate in testosterone comes into sport. So if you're tested, if you're in a women's league and you're tested and your testosterone's too high, then you're.
It's funny you raised it because when we play for fun and that no one have a look at it. Male and female just enjoy themselves. But when money start to get involved, then everybody start to look because performance start to be identified. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, that probably comes under the purpose of sports. All right.
Yeah.
So that's how, so when you are a trans woman wanting to compete in a women's category, you can't just, as I said before, you can't just sort of slip in and start playing. There's huge things that you need to do. So you need to have the testosterone suppressant. And that even saying that sounds easy, but it takes years to get the hormones down. But then also that really causes a lot of damage to a lot of people that take the suppressants actually have said that it's made them quite ill. But because they love the sport, they said they'll do anything to be able to be recognised as that's their right to, that's who they identify as, and that's where they want to compete as.
So if I was to summarize one of the arguments, so if I was to look from a certain perspective, I'm an outsider looking in and I'm go, well, hang on. You've got a person who was assigned as male at birth, went through puberty, and then identified as then was a trans woman.
No, that's, yeah.
So the argument is, well, how is that still fair? Because they've got the benefit of that teenage years where they were bolstered in body as such. And so that even if they did do all the suppressants and everything, I could still see the argument that is used. And I guess that's ongoing argument. It's still not fair. Is that where they're still at?
That's exactly where they're at.
So regardless, even if they follow all the rules and do all the suppressants, well, you've still had that booster at the start.
Except if they're not winning.
If they're winning, then it's a problem.
It's a problem.
If they're not winning, who cares?
Because in the book, it actually gives a really good example. Even Katie was following, because Katie's a sports writer, has followed all the different stories. And in the book, it talks about there's two trans women are running in a race. And then someone says, oh, there was actually three in that race. We're talking big races. And Katie goes, well, which one? And it's the one that came last.
Yeah.
Not last, but in the back of the, but nobody's wanting to know anything about this person because
it's only when you're on elite.
It's only when you're winning.
Yeah.
Because then it becomes unfair.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Since
unfairness only happen when there's a competitive sport. That's when the
Rachel,
unfair. Yeah,
Rachel, sports is a
yeah,
very lucrative and very viable business. So winning is big time. And
yes.
so I would imagine that anybody involved in that would want it scrutinized, uh, you know, very, very well to make sure that it's fair. But it's, you and I know that it's very complicated.
oh, it is so complicated. Exactly.
Can I ask? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go, Linny. Yeah.
I just have a question. With everything you've been looking at, I mean, I can't imagine this hasn't been looked at, what I'm going to ask, but I haven't seen anything that so far. And that is there any real reason why they can't have 4 categories? Like if they had to segregate male from female, why can't they also segregate trans female from the rest and trans male from the rest, so that they're only competing with people who are the same, if you know what I mean? Why has that been? I mean, I'm assuming that's been looked at. Has it?
Yeah, it's actually a really good point because a lot of people have said that. I thought of that. I was having a discussion with my partner about the same
Yeah.
sort of thing. But what, and then sorry, Katie doesn't, pronouns are they, them, and yeah. So Katie talks a little bit about it, but because what the ironic thing is about all this is that there's not that many trans people in sports, full stop. In the elite category, there is hardly any. So to be able to have a whole different category, there's just not enough people to even, and and then you've got funding behind that, and there's a whole lot of bringing into that. So
Mm.
good point, because
The thing
everyone
is,
has thought of that too.
can I? Well, I would imagine so. So the thing is, though, there wasn't a lot of women in elite sport either until they started to make it more fair. So maybe if they actually created those categories, more people would start to compete, because I could imagine if you were a trans person involved in sport, it would be very intimidating to have to go through everything that you've got to go through just to be allowed to compete. So
Yeah.
I wonder if there would actually be a lot more competing if they were recognised as a category. Anyway, just a thought.
Oh, and Lynn, I appreciate your thoughts. I think they're good for discussion. That's what I'm hoping, that everyone, if you've got anything in your mind, it's a good time to talk about it, because as where we're standing, we really want to understand these things. How does it become fair? As Brendan pointed out, that the whole idea of talking about it is what is the right.
Rachel.
This in the chat.
I was just, can I just say, with what you just said there, how does it become fair? The fact is, how deep do you go with what's fair? Because just your normal genetics within female or male, aside from any trans situations, there's already genetic factors that make something fair. If you have certain type of muscle structure, your long muscle structure, I believe you can do long distance running, or if you've got the short, you do the short, or vice versa, however it is. Point is, there's no way I'm going to be an elite athlete, even when I was younger, pretty much, because I probably wasn't born with those genetics anyway. So really, when you say fairness, there is a level of flexibility within that scope, one assumes, because of all of that anyway. So sorry to interrupt everybody.
No, Lynn, that's a really good point, because Molly, you've brought up the performance of like testosterone and in that way. So the other side of the argument is, what about fairness? What about genetics? What about the resources that it takes to become an athlete? What about the training? And a big, huge one under this one is, what about finances and money? someone might have all this stuff going on, but they don't have any of this going on. So when it comes about fairness and underperformance, there are another category of complexities as well. So if you don't have money, you could have all the
talent doesn't
in the world, but it doesn't help.
Yeah.
So this is about fairness is so broad. Sorry.
I have a comment too when there's a gap.
Yeah, sure.
Just going back to that idea of having separate categories for trans athletes, my understanding, it may not be for all, but certainly for many of them, is that they want to be treated and accepted as the same as cisgender women. So they don't want to be classed in a separate category. So I don't know that they particularly want that as a solution. They want to be understood as genuine and real, say, females, if that's the way they identify. They want to be seen as the same legitimacy as a female, as a cisgender woman.
Yeah, so they want to be included, right? They want
to be included.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I further comment on that point, because you've brought that up? When we're looking at other things like education or careers, women want to be treated the same as men because that's equality, right? The fact is, in sport, they're not, because they can't. So maybe even though they might be able to be treated the same in other aspects of life, maybe a part of that reality for them is they can't, because they're born with certain differences that means that, I mean, I totally respect why they would want to be included because of their, being women. And I think they should be treated, if you're a trans woman, you should definitely be treated as a woman. But you could still be treated as a woman, just like with equality, even though you might have a separate category, just like women in sport can be treated with equality, even though they're going to be separate from men. Anyway, that was just a further comment to that, because I think it's a valid.
Yeah, and I have another one as well, just another consideration, because some people will use, they'll say, if you've got a trans person, they've used hormone blockers, and then you'll have other ones that didn't do that, and then they've done some physical hormones and stuff after puberty. So then if you're going to have them all in one group, you'll have some differences amongst them as well. Some that they've gone through puberty and then transitioned, and some that sort of, so I don't know, it just sort of becomes a bit complicated as well, even on that front.
Yeah, I appreciate your argument there, or your comment there, Catherine, because there's, we're defined so much by these two categories. I think that's probably the problem.
I just want to say something obvious. I want to ask why. So the focus has always been on trans women.
Correct.
No one cares about trans men in sports. So you've got this contrast here. And what is the base of that? Is the base still fairness?
There is a really...
What's the reason? No one cares about trans men.
So until they start winning.
Oh, okay.
Until they start winning. So then it becomes unfair.
But then it just destroys their own arguments.
Exactly.
If there's an issue, once a trans man starts winning everything and they have a problem with that, it undercuts their whole trans women argument.
So
completely.
So there's a really good story. It's called MAP. So there's a person that's born as a female, transitions to a trans man. In college, wrestling, you don't have categories before a certain age. I can't remember what the age is. It's not so much around puberty, but it's that they can compete against each other. So this person, Mac, wants to compete, transitions to a male, but not with hormones or not with anything, just decides to cut the hair and wants to identify as a male, no big transition, is competing, wants to fight men, not allowed to fight men, because of this title. Not allowed because they've identified Matt as a female because of the body parts. So not allowed it. So has to compete against women, girls, women, beating every woman. It's unfair because, you know, and all Matt wants to do is compete against men. Finally gets the opportunity to compete against men, starts winning. They've got a problem. And that's why that story became such big headlines in America. So many stories to talk about, real life stories. Walked away from wrestling, walked away because of the media. Their own teammates were criticising, but the whole time Mac wanted to just wrestle.
So wait,
So until they start winning. Pardon?
so the best they could hope for is to be mediocre and just fly under the radar. Go to all this trouble and hope to be in the middle of the field somewhere so that
Yeah, it seems like that, doesn't it? Right? It just seems that
that,
you can do what
that
you want, but just
sucks.
don't win. Just don't win.
With Brendan's question before, I was actually wondering, is there a parallel here? No one cares about trans men using men's bathrooms, but people care about trans women using women's bathrooms.
Marilyn?
Oh.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea the difference in size? Being born a female, you'd have to presume then that they'd be smaller. And fighting men and winning, what does that do?
Well, maybe that's about these
Genetic.
natural performance. You know, maybe they're just really good at, headlocking. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. But if you're just looking at size and they're winning and being smaller, they must have some type of technique and all sorts of things that
Training,
yeah.
resources.
But that should be something to look at with admiration, really.
For sure.
Purely,
Yeah.
because of the size, just purely. Anyway.
No, it's a good comment. Yeah. You can see the complexities of every argument. It's like every argument has really, profound, it's a really hard one to.
Is there a solution?
That's what we're trying to find out, aren't we?
Well,
Rachel, I'm going to bump in.
Yeah, go bump in.
Just that Brandon has put a link in the chat to remind us of Amani Khalif, the Algerian boxer in the last Olympics, which was a huge scandal. So that's just something. And before you finish, if you could write up that woman's name. You've got Marie, but is it Maria? That would be good for us to look up. Thanks, Rachel. Don't go off track. Keep.
Well, actually, Brendan, do you want to bring up what you were talking about too on the way in about when we're talking about policies and laws and we've got media, but this is like a whole culture war, really.
What did I say?
About Trump, about how. So Brendan
yeah.
made some comment when we were driving in that I kind of went, oh yeah, I forgot about that, but yeah.
Well, one of the big policy arguments that Trump made that convinced quite a few people to jump across and support him was his argument was, I'm going to get men out of women's sports. And that convinced quite a lot of people to jump across and support him in that. So the Sunday Law waymark, one of the big drivers and one of the big topics was this subject. So it's not something we can ignore. We need to navigate these difficult discussions. I just want to say thank you for having the courage to have a crack at this.
Oh, I feel like I'm way out of my depth.
But yeah, Sunday, this was a quite a significant topic.
It's
the culture war that led to the Sunday Law of Trump being elected.
Absolutely. And this is probably where those arguments come in. It's because of the physiological effects after puberty that athlete actually retains a lot of. So that's their argument on that side of. even though the blockers I mean, you know, there's people coming up that are having blockers so that they don't go through puberty. You know, that's another whole different avenue, talking about, you know, where do they sit in amongst everything. Is there any more? I've got quite a lot to go through, but I'm thinking I might just sort of round it up a little bit.
Feels like we're just scratching the
Oh,
surface.
it is. I don't want to overwhelm everybody in that way. I will write Maria's name up.
Rachel,
Just add,
I've got a
Yeah.
couple of points whenever you
Yeah.
want them added.
Yes, go for it. Add away.
It's something I've been looking into a little bit as well. The
good.
transgender people in America are about, they're estimating between 1% and 2% of the population. But in 2025 alone, based on that 1% to 2% of their population, there was 745 anti-trans bills in that
Yeah.
1 year. And with relation to the Olympics or people in sport who identify as transgender, in 2021 there was a study done in the Journal of Medicine that found that there was no evidence to support that transgender women had an advantage. Then the International Olympics Committee did another study in 2024, and it was the same. There was no advantage to transgender women, and they also brought out that there was multiple disadvantages for them. So, as Brendan started to allude to before, it's the claim that they use as fairness, or that's the idea that they come from. They say it's not fair, but that's hiding the true intent behind their fear. That's all.
Graham, can I ask you a little bit, because I did touch on a little bit of those. So the reason why the conclusion was, is it because all the I lost my thought. Those people that were competing to say that because of the way that they had to transition and years of doing or hormone therapy, is that the reason why they found there was no advantages? Yeah, so the suppressants can really damage. Yeah. And actually, even the way that they oxygen around their body, it's actually a disadvantage, to be honest. Did you find that, Graham, when you're reading the disadvantages of taking do that talk about that? Of the hormone suppressants that they have to take?
It is part of that, but I don't think it's the whole story. There's something else there that their bodies don't create all of the same things that others do.
So
yes, part of it is that.
can I ask just a qualifying question, Graham, just so I understand? And I haven't read those studies. I do remember them from a long time ago now, so thank you for reminding me. But just a clarifying question. So those studies, did it basically say those who were, assigned the sex of male at birth, they went through puberty, and then transition, they essentially, once they went through that process, they had no advantage. So going through puberty was not seen as an advantage, and that was the science that they investigated and found. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what the two studies have shown.
Which is, I guess, the science. So it if there is an advantage in I guess you got to define what advantage occurs during puberty as males, and then does that advantage get taken away through that transition period and neutralizes it and actually goes even further and actually makes it.
Well, Rachel's got the study, and I think you've got that information in your book, haven't you, Rachel? Like,
Yeah.
you could go down that direction.
Yeah,
if we let Rachel.
and I think that I think today I'm just sort of presenting just, a bit of food
Yeah,
for thoughts.
But you can do a part 2, part 3, and share that information.
Yeah, I really want to, because I'm only just getting my head around it, to be honest, and to present it, it's, I don't want to say the wrong things or give it any injustice. So I do think it's important. I think a lot of the things that we're speaking about science is inconclusive. I think there's not enough, it hasn't been studied in depth enough to see what I've read, to see the effects. You know what I mean? Like, that hasn't been studied long enough to actually have it's very inclusive. Is that what's the word when you say
Inconclusive.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, my words are mixed up. Yeah, and I think this is why the book's probably important, because it's trying to start those conversations and trying to bring into the conversations about the history, about science, about what we consider fairness, and having that respect for human dignity all in one. And it's a balancing act, to say the least. So go.
Trump putting an end to all that sort of investigation, because he won't fund universities if they're attacking it, or
so he's gone there, in that way. What
Can I
what
add
else?
to that? Oh, sorry. Has John finished?
Yeah.
I was just going to add to a little bit of what Brendan said before, and also what John just mentioned in regards to Trump. And that is the fact that conservatives have a very, very black and white view of what being trans is. To them, it's just some sort of made up thing. It's all, you're either born female, you're born male, that's it, black and white. They seem to be very ignorant on any of the science, or even, the whole topic, really. So they just go with black and white. And the other thing is they're very busy trying to blame gun violence on trans people, which is interesting. So in other words, it's not guns that are the problem. It's actually people with psychiatric problems, and they see trans people as being people with psychiatric problems. So they're basing it all down to they're mentally ill. So it's just comments, really, but I'm sure that's all part and parcel of some of what you've been looking at.
So, Rachel, bring your thoughts to a close here, and then have prayer, and then people can come in with their extra thoughts and opinions.
For sure. So just to do like a real quick summary of this this book. As I said, it wasn't really a summary, it was just taking points out. I think the fairness, so we can see culturally the gender debate's been going on for quite a while, and then understanding what it means to have fairness, and fairness seems to be a governing factor on both sides of the argument. So when we think of fairness, everybody seems to want to have some kind of protection, if that being protecting women's sport or protecting trans rights. Safety is an issue in there. We've got, what's fair, inclusion, being included, equality. having equal opportunities, fairness in performance, and then we've got, then we've got the other side of the argument is, well, is there fairness? And we've got, what about genetics? How does that become fair? Or the resources, as we've already talked about. And then we talked about the finances, so that, what's fairness about, how does that contribute to performance as well? So I might just read just something little from the book, maybe. Oh, there's so much to bring out. So yeah, I look forward to if I just do like a little bit of an overview of, there's criticisms about the book as well. So, people were sort of saying there's a bit of a bias that Katie's bringing out. There's limited scientific data, and then the complex policy parts of the book. But really, it's very hard to put everything into a book, because you're getting all these different, that's what I found when I was reading all these different arguments. How do you actually bring it all together to start the conversation in a balanced way? So
Are they just asking the question because she's winning, or
because she's winning?
because the book's winning?
Actually, it won an award. It won the best. Oh, what did we read? It won awards.
Must read.
2023 must read book. So there you go. Yeah, so she was Katie was winning. I guess it's an important and informative book. So for many reasons, because it's the most debated issue in modern sport. So this book really brings everything to light. There's not many arguments that Katie doesn't touch on. So we talked about history and science and policy behind the controversy. And this is just a touch of the iceberg. I really want to dig a lot deeper into this. So she shows the debate over transgender participation in sports is far more complex and is often presented in public discussions. By examining the history of women's athletics, the development of laws like Title IX, and the evolving science surrounding sex and performance. So the book really does highlight and defines fairness in competitive sports. And there's this balance of needing to understand science and policy, and then the protection for opportunities for any athlete, to be honest. Because then you've got women's rights, you've got trans rights. So ultimately, the book really encourages you to, it really encourages you to move past the surface level arguments, and really makes you be curious and want to dive deeper into the arguments. And I guess on a social, the purpose of sport seems to be mirroring what's happening in society. So it's a culture war of what's happening overall. So I'm really looking forward to reading more of the book. I haven't finished the book, so which doesn't help because as you start reading the book and then you go, oh, what's that's about, and you go off reading something else. So let's close with prayer, and then we'll be able to discuss a lot more. Just ask you to bow your heads. Our God in heaven, we are just standing at the tip of the iceberg, trying to understand such a complex issues in our society. Lord, I know I probably didn't do it much justice at all, but just out of curiosity for people to want to know more, I just pray that we would really think upon these things and understand both sides of the arguments to better understand what not only is what fairness is, but what is right for people that are going through these things. We hope that you would. We ask that you'd help us to consider these things, that we may have a position, that we may know where we stand in these culture wars. We pray for a blessing for the rest of the Sabbath. In your name, Jesus. Amen.